Hey, it's Tom Jordan. Welcome to this episode of Tom Jordan Live. I want to talk a little bit about today about election integrity because one of the things that keeps this country free is the election process. The United States is very unique in how we pick our candidates, but by and large, it's done through a vote of the people, and that's how we decide who will govern us. People we temporarily put in charge, the ones we decide to hire based on who we deem collectively is best fit for the job, whatever it is, whether it's a mayor, a city council member, state senator, governor, a member of Congress, or even the president, of course, of the United States. You may have noticed lately that any question nowadays about the current procedures that might shed a bit of negative light on said procedures is considered dangerous to democracy. And that didn't used to be the case. It wasn't even that long ago. Most of the American media heavily questioned the legitimacy of an election. It was 2016. Donald Trump was elected by the people as president of the United States. And Hillary Clinton, a Democrat, went berserk after that happened, called it illegitimate, and so did the media. Take a look.
I don't see this president-elect as a legitimate president.
You do not consider him a legitimate president?
Those are remarkable words, given the moral authority and democratic witness that John Lewis has bore throughout his life.
Coming from John Lewis, it resonates even more than it would from anybody else.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did. Trump knows he's an illegitimate president who got illegitimate foreign help.
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
I know that he knows that this wasn't on the level.
Why do you think the president is going to such great lengths to essentially prove that he beat you?
Because he knows he didn't. He knows he's an illegitimate president.
I don't see this president.
Yeah, so there you have it. All that dangerous rhetoric way back in 2016, 2017. It continues today, actually, not to mention the dozens of Democrats over the years who have voted to not certify the results of a presidential election, including Jerry Nadler, Barbara Lee, Barbara Boxer, Sheila Jackson Lee, and then, of course, the Trump election in 2017 in their individual states. Democrats in Congress once again challenged the election outcome. Representative Jim McGovern of Massachusetts cited the confirmed and illegal activities engaged by the government of Russia. It was even argued that Michigan's electoral vote should be thrown out because people are horrified by the overwhelming evidence of Russian interference in our elections and the malfunction of 87 voting machines as well. That was back in 2017. There were Democrats, these were the Democrats, claiming fraud and a stolen election in 2016. In fact, it got so bonkers during that time that Hillary Clinton, her campaign, began the process of this wild conspiracy theory that actually Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin worked together to steal the 2016 presidential election. And no, it wasn't true. They said it was, but it wasn't. Donald Trump truly got the votes to be elected, and that would have been constitutionally crazy in their mind. So no one would ever do that, they thought. So, but she concocted evidence, Hillary Clinton did, and through the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, and the media built a wild conspiracy theory that Russia and Donald Trump stole the 2016 election. And that was the prevailing narrative throughout Donald Trump's presidency. Years long investigations, people went to prison over this. Americans were spied on by their own intelligence agencies. And in the end, after an in depth and a tens of millions of dollars funded investigation, they couldn't find any evidence that linked Donald Trump to Russia. There was no collusion, no evidence of it, none whatsoever. So I bring that up because you fast forward to 2020, Donald Trump believes there was fraud, enough fraud to put Joe Biden into the office and steal the election. So he makes that claim, the same claim they made back in 2016. Suddenly, almost every Democrat politician I know said questioning the outcome of an election is disinformation, a huge threat to this country. It puts the lives of election workers in danger and is itself a massive conspiracy theory concocted by the cult followers of Donald Trump, blindly following their leader by believing such cockamy and propaganda that they had put out there. So suddenly the narrative shifts. And as a result of that, progressive leftist secretaries of state and attorneys general and legislative bodies began to implement laws that would make such intimidating comments and talk and speech criminal, all the while making it easier to commit fraud, easier to cheat in elections. That's the accusation anyway. Take away basic common sense boundaries like ID requirements, proper signature verifications, and extending by weeks the ability to vote not only in person but by mail. Something even the country of France outlawed because of the known vulnerabilities to fraud. So you got multiple duplicates of applications to vote by mail. It would be sent to the same person, people who no longer even lived at those addresses, if they even lived at all, actually. And those addresses were receiving applications to vote by mail. And even though there was video evidence of people bringing stacks of ballots to these newly commissioned mail in drop boxes, there was full on denial that those things were happening anywhere in this country. And once again, the news media picked up the narrative, doing investigative reports on people who claimed there was fraud occurring. County sheriffs who investigated fraud were themselves charged by liberal attorneys general. The FBI would show up at people's houses, and they were making such who they thought were making such radical and ridiculous claims that there was any fraud to overturn the election. I'm not saying I believe it all did, but I'm saying these same claims were made by the Democrats. And one of those states where this might be happening the most is in the state of Michigan. And one example would be the Detroit Election Commission, which is accused of hiring more than 7 times more Democratic poll workers than Republican poll workers. That's a total violation of existing state law. The law requires an equal number of poll workers from both major political parties. So, why did Detroit hire 2,300 Democrats and only 300 Republicans? Many of them were rejected. So, this overwhelming disparity in hiring raises concern about whether Detroit's election commission is intentionally sidelining Republicans to influence the outcome, the exact opposite of ensuring fair elections. The same thing is playing out in many large cities all over the country and in small cities as well. Detroit alone, by the way, leaving 200 precincts without a single Republican poll worker when state law mandates at least one from each major party. That's just one issue of many. We're going to get into it later. It's Michigan's Proposal 2 in the 2022 midterms amended the state constitution in such a way that it now allows that state of Michigan to fundamentally change how people vote. So there's been a slew of lawsuits against Michigan's Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. Republicans claim that these new rules and regulations are partisan, creates a wide pathway for one political party, the Democratic Party, to remain in control by taking away safeguards for a free and fair election process. So in a moment, I'm going to bring in Senator Jim Runstad. He's been one of the vocal objectors to these laws and these practices, and he'll join me in a few moments. But first, I do want to talk about a larger issue here because this kind of goes more towards the foundational premise of why these things are happening. There's this constant friction that has developed between political parties to such a degree that it has allowed for certain laws, certain statements, certain behavior to be considered appropriate from one side's perspective and almost blasphemous if it comes from the other side. And the election integrity issues are just one example of many of this occurring. Another main issue popping up now is somehow that one side is violent while the other is peaceful. Donald Trump was just a victim a second time in 2 minutes of an assassination attempt on his life. And the media, in large part, is blaming Donald Trump himself for that attack. They say it's his rhetoric, it's his demeanor, it's his own, exemplified, I guess, self exemplified danger and proclivity to violence that makes him a target. They're victim shaming here. They're making it seem, it's a legitimate thing to do to go after him. But the media itself has been stoking for years now the hatred towards a man they disdained with such passion that they've been allowed comment after comment to go on their airwaves calling for the elimination of Donald Trump. So just yesterday, as this came out after the assassination attempt, Hillary Clinton gets back on the airways, goes on Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, and repeats these same claims about what a dangerous man Donald Trump is to all of us. Congressman Dan Goldman said there is no way that Donald Trump should be allowed back in office, that he needs to be eliminated. It's from a member of Congress. And then there's a very self righteous news anchor, a man who says both sides in this are not equal. There's no moral equivalence, essentially, between Democrats and Republicans. Lester Holt went on the airwaves to say this.
Today's apparent assassination attempt comes amid increasingly fierce rhetoric on the campaign trail itself. Mr. Trump, his running mate J.D. Vance continue to make baseless claims about Haitian immigrants in Ohio.
Yeah, there you have it. Lester Holt's coverage. Instead of focusing on the attempted attack or the dangerous political climate created by years of anti Trump media rhetoric, Holt chose to blame Trump's own words, continuing this trend of holding Trump responsible for actions he had no part in. This was his coverage. And this is something I think that he and many people within NBC News and CBS News and the Washington Post and New York Times, and just go down the list of different media outlets, truly believe. And they're listening to a lot of Democratic politicians when they say that. And notice Lester Holter when he said the phrase fierce rhetoric by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Baseless claims is the way he phrased it. Fierce rhetoric. That sounds violent. Baseless claims. None of these things are true that he's saying. And then he went on further to blame Donald Trump and J.D. Vance for these bomb threats that came in down to Ohio, which actually came out to be completely wrong. They weren't legitimate bomb. They came from overseas. Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, made that clear. So those claims also, by the way, from residents of Ohio about these Haitian immigrants, that was from the residents that were being repeated by Trump and Vance. They weren't made up by them. Anyway, all of this is a distraction. You know, connecting the assassination attempt on Donald Trump to his claim about illegal immigrants, saying Trump's words were fierce. There's a lot going on in our country regarding this kind of rhetoric out there, and the media is very much involved. And I've contended since 2020 that the biggest election interference and the biggest reason there's so much division within this country is not because of Donald Trump. It's not even because of Democrats. It's because of the news media, where they ignore certain statements or they amplify certain statements as if it is a good premise to build their newscast on because someone truly is a danger. So let's go after him. Blame the victim if it's a Republican, but blame the Republican if the victim is a Democrat. I mean, that's the way it seems that's been going on here. What happens as a result of this? So you got the media going out there, they're in their bubble. Okay, that's how they think. But tens of millions of people are paying attention to this in this country. And eventually, that hatred ends up coming into our mindsets, into our psyche in this country, and division takes hold out of that. I want to talk about this with a friend of mine, longtime friend of mine. He's a psychologist, Dr. Brooks Gibbs. He's been working for many years on these kind of social cohesion issues, and sometimes the type of issues that a lot of teenagers will deal with when it comes with depression and anxiety and bullying, things you did in high school and middle school, which now obviously is playing out in the adult realm as well in the news outlets. It's kind of childish what we're seeing, but it has real term and real life, real time consequences in our lives as well as adults in this social realm. What do we do with all this doubt and self-doubt and anger and bitterness, hopelessness? That I would contend is in much of the United States. Dr. Gibbs joins me now on Tom Jordan Live. Brooks, it's great to have you back. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Tom, congrats on the new show, man. I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. I know you've dealt with, we've talked in years past about all the issues that are plaguing us in the social realm. And a lot of it has to do with resilience. We're so easily offended nowadays. And when we're offended, we feel like we have a right to fight back with certain words that could, escalate the situation even further. But when you look at what's happening right now and you see the assassination attempts, the real world violence that is occurring, and there's this call to tone down the rhetoric, what comes into your mindset as a psychologist who deals with people all the time that are dealing with all sorts of self-doubt and anxiety in our society today?
Well, students are often a reflection of the greater society around them. We wonder why kids are so miserable, why aggression is at an all-time high, why the number one cause of death among students between 14 and 18 years old is suicide. We wonder why, all these problems are happening in youth culture. But then you turn on the news and you realize there's mass pathology happening. They are witnessing around them people in the political spectrum, specifically on the left, who always identify as a victim of the other person and gaslight the individual for doing the very thing that they are doing to them. And kids are looking at that and they're saying, this is crazy. And they often reflect whatever the grown-ups project. And so this is a problem. You've got rigid demands that the left is making and distorted um, cognitive distortions, over generalization, black and white thinking. If we have Trump, we're not going to have democracy. It's all or nothing thinking. Any psychologist that went to Psych 101, anyone who went to community college and learned basic psych principles, they know that the rhetoric or the persuasive conversation coming from the commentators on the news media are full of lies and distortions and catastrophizing and labeling and all this hatred. And I really look at this, Tom, the heart of the issue is the issue of the heart. The people on the left, really, those that really have a vindictive, retaliatory, violent kind of repulsion for Donald Trump, are just revealing what's actually in their heart. They have a heart problem. I'm okay if you hate the policies or you hate kind of the belief system or the perspective or the philosophy of life that your opponent comes from. But to actually label someone and funnel all of your hatred towards the actual person, that is a poison that will destroy you from the inside out and everyone who listens to you.
So what generates this? Because, listen, a lot of these people that nowadays hate this Donald Trump or whatever it is that he represents, a lot of them loved him prior to him getting into politics. They loved going on his show when he was on The Apprentice. They loved him because he was a millionaire in New York City. And, you got Reverend Jesse Jackson, who praised Donald Trump for all the good he's done for the black community in New York. And he comes into Detroit and does things for the black community. Al Sharpton, same thing. Now he becomes a Republican candidate for presidential office. He is one of the most hated men in the world, if not the most hated man in the world. Is it him specifically, or is it the ideology that he might represent, do you think?
Well, you find this in any place in the world where people are interacting. Whenever you see or hear someone say, I hate them, two things are at play. A fairness construct that's being violated and frustration and tolerance. This is from Dr. Albert Ellis from Rational Motive Behavioral Therapy. He says, I don't care what the social dynamic is, where it is in the planet. If someone hates another person, they believe that they are being unfair and that they are blocking their goals. So when Trump went into office and he decided to say, hey, I'm going to run for president, he became a blockage to their ultimate goal. And I could always tell the rigidity of one's demand based on the level of disturbance they're expressing. Just like a temper tantrum 2-year-old toddler. If he's flailing on the ground looking like he's demon possessed, I know he demanded that he must have something and he didn't get it. To the degree that you demand, to that degree you will be disturbed. So when I see the left screaming and demonizing him and labeling him and calling for aggression and violence and saying he's going to destroy the whole world, well, I realize they have a demand at a very deep degree. I mean, a deep level that he must not, ought not, should not, better not block our goals. And apparently Trump is a massive threat to them accomplishing their ultimate agenda. That's why.
I couldn't agree with you more. And then we have to ask the question, okay, then, what is the ultimate agenda of these far left progressive Democrats? And I don't think every Democrat shares this same agenda, but in your view, what is it? What's their ultimate goal that they want to get to? Donald Trump comes in, maybe some conservatives get in the way, and they want to shove him aside so they can accomplish that goal. But what is that ultimate goal in your view?
Well, I think this is the easiest thing to discern. It is not confusing at all. All you have to do is listen to what they're blaming Donald Trump of being. They believe he's a fascist dictator. That's what they want. They want to use the power of the state to rip away liberties, to force their own version of morality and control the mass population. They want to be dictators. They blame him for being an absolute evil, person who thinks he's a threat to democracy. Well, actually, they are a threat to democracy. Even the electoral process is being hindered by the left. This is extremely concerning. This is why in J6 you had a bunch of people there basically protesting to be able to say fair and free elections. There is crap going on. There is shady stuff going on, and we need time to investigate it. Well, if you just listen to what they are blaming Trump for, they are confessing their own sins.
Hmm. That's brilliant. And because it kind of helps explain this cognitive dissidence or whatever it is we have in America, where we can see them doing and praising the exact same things that they say when the right does it is harmful. And, you mentioned January 6th. They now are categorizing that or characterizing that as the greatest attack on democracy since the Civil War. When just, about a year and a half prior to that, there were massive violent riots that were breaking out all over this country where people were being killed. They were being shot and killed. They were being kicked in the head. Their head was like a soccer ball. And these were just common individuals walking around, small business owners in minority communities that were being attacked. But they categorized that as something that was mostly peaceful and actually justified because of the sins of this country. And this is an uprising for righteousness' sake. And you had governors like in Michigan going out during COVID, during her lockdowns, and other governors doing the same thing, marching arm in arm with groups that represented like Antifa and these violent aspects of Black Lives Matter, marching and protesting the institutions of this country. And somehow that was okay. Like COVID wasn't going to attack them because they were marching for righteousness. But it just kind of speaks of the larger issue here. They were praising something that they later condemned on January 6, 2021. Why don't more Americans understand when they see that? It's just like what I brought up with the election integrity thing. They were claiming the same things in 2001, 2004, and 05, 2016, that these elections were illegitimate, that they were stolen from the Democrats by the Republicans. Suddenly, in 2020, when that comes up, that becomes dangerous to democracy. What is it about most Americans that they can't see the hypocrisy that is occurring right before their very eyes?
I think because they're not actually there. I study social psychology for 25 years now. That's my PhD. And when the J6 thing was coming around, I'm going to take you to DC. Why, Dad? Why would we go there? I said, because I want you to see with your own eyes what is happening. And then I want to turn on the news and let you be exposed to what the media says happened. And if I can sear this in your mind that there is a evil agenda to demonize the other side, and you saw with your own eyes that there was peace, harmony, kumbaya. Yeah, there was a few knuckleheads that caused some problems, but for the vast majority, a bunch of grandmas and grandpas with grandkids and flags and patriotism. I was there January 6th and I did it. We homeschool our kids. And so I did it as a lesson for my child to see. And he is forever transformed. He knows now what he hears in the media is likely a complete fabrication of reality. And you know what mental health is? Mental health is the ability to adjust to reality. Mentally healthy people are in touch with reality. Mental illness, on the other hand, is trying to make reality accommodate your ideals. So you will become less mentally healthy when you watch media that does not represent reality. I challenge everyone watching that if you really want to get in touch with reality, show up to these, see it with your own eyes, bring your kids as long as it's safe, and help them see the hypocrisy that unfortunately is in our country.
Oh yeah, you got to do that, and I think good parents will do that. Okay, so now these issues are beginning to manifest themselves, I think, in different ways, and they've become, and I spoke a bit about this yesterday about these now political issues, which, in my view, and I would suspect in your view as well, are really ethical and moral issues as well, and these are sometimes very spiritual issues. But they become, political in the sense that now there's policies and laws being created to implement these things. And one of the things I'll bring up is because I find this to be abhorrent what legislatures and these politicians now fully support. And I'll bring up just one of the ways this all manifests itself. And this is this growing acceptance within our society to allow children to be indoctrinated with this ideology of, gender affirming care, and maybe they're not born biologically with the sex that their parents told them they were. And I know this is being, supported, and maybe even the genesis of this is starting off in some of these psychological counseling sessions that these kids are subjecting themselves to, some of them in the schools without their parents even knowing about it. That they're saying, listen, the reason why you might be depressed right now or maybe confused in your life, because maybe, have you thought about this? Maybe you're a different gender. Maybe you're not a boy. Maybe you're actually a little girl. And then they go down this trail and start to change their mind on that, and it becomes more and more accepted to the point where now, a lot of them are getting these irreversible gender changing, sex change surgeries, which after they go through puberty, they're going to regret. Most of them do. That's not being allowed in our society in terms of our discussion to talk about the real, informed consent, those types of things, to talk about the real dangers. And these, I mean, look at Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. What he is now allowed in the state of Minnesota is to allow, let's say, a kid who's 12 going through all the, things that you deal with, Brooks, when you deal with all the anxiety and confusion, as we all went through as we're, prepubescent little kids, tweens, if you call it that, and confusion about life. And now, if they want to suddenly get a sex change because some psychologist told them that maybe is a solution to their ailments, and their parents say no, they're allowed now to go to Minnesota. And Tim Walz's government will shield that child from their parents. In fact, they will take them away from the parents. They will provide that sex change surgery for a prepubescent teenager, and they will become a ward of the state. To me, that is something that is so evil and so wrong and backwards. And I think it's just one of the ways of this, maybe this ultimate goal is manifesting itself in some of these more far left progressive um, areas in our country. Do you find that one example is being a solution to the ailments of our mental health in this country, or does it exacerbate it?
Well, I think that these policies are ultimately on the association level. If you look at the APA, the American Psychological Association, or any medical association, these are the people that actually govern the licensure process. And so we really have cowards as psychologists and psychiatrists and medical doctors who are doing what they're told and threaten that they'll lose their license. The battle needs to be on the association level. The associations have been captured people with an agenda to basically rewrite the DSM-5, like gender dysphoria. They'll just totally take it out. Now, this is for hundreds of years, thousands of years, we have dealt with these things. People don't know who they are. It's existential for them to discover that, and there is alternative ways to help people. You are not live for the approval of others, but we have this recruiting grounds, especially libraries. That's a cesspool for indoctrinating children in alternative. And if you try, like my wife has, we try to basically protest against these libraries that are pushing this thing, especially on teens, because there's an explosion in teens struggling with sexual identity. And we say, hey, offer other seminars, author other books, feature other things. These are the most intolerant people on planet Earth. And ironically, they always preach tolerance. They say, we will not tolerate anyone who's not tolerant of us because we are tolerant people. It's a logical absurdity. So I think if we deal with it on the association level, then that will help empower medical professionals to be emboldened and say, you know what, I'm not going to destroy your life, kiddo. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so this, I guess, will be one of my final questions to you, because this all like centers this conversation around the rhetoric that exists now in this country, and we're being told to tone it down. And to me, when I hear that, I say, yeah, let's tone it down in terms of mischaracterizing somebody as something that they are not, like going back to Donald Trump, that somehow he is a dictator and a authoritarian. He's going to, overturn this country. When we know that's not the case, he didn't do that when he was president before. So, at what point? I mean, how do you discern how to do that? How do we tone things down where it's more of a respectful dialogue, but at the same time fight for things that need to be fought for? When we see something that is evil, is it still okay to call that thing evil? You know what I'm trying to say here? How do we do this? How do we have these open dialogue? Because to me, I feel like you should contend for things that are good and right. And some that times that comes through argumentation. It could be very vociferous. Is that still okay, or how do you assess and how we navigate through these times of this political hatred that we see in this country?
We have to get back to the old school golden rule. You wouldn't want someone to demonize or mischaracterize you, so don't do that to other people. You don't mind if they basically pick apart your policies or your worldview. You don't mind that because that's called a debate. That's what a free and open society is all about. Beautiful. Free speech is awesome. Demonize or characterize you. So it's a violation of the golden rule, which makes it patently immoral to do that to your perceived enemy. And so we need to separate the problem that we perceive that they have from the person and who they are. Martin Luther King famously said, there's enough good in the worst of us. When we focus on that good, we'll be less likely to hate our enemies. Jesus said, you've heard that you shall love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemy. Do good to them, pray for them, and bless them. Don't curse them. This is a moral issue. But when you have a godless media, a godless society, people who are humanistic, they believe they themselves are gods, they have no moral compass, and they follow each other like 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 cattle going off a cliff, destroying everything that they think that they're saving. Well, then you don't have a moral compass. So I suggest that those who have ethics, morals, they are God-fearers, lead by example. And the people who are on the fence will notice, you know what? I feel better when I'm listening to you because you're preaching for something. I really don't feel good when I'm listening to them because they're always preaching against something. And just the solical level will gravitate towards the morality that's being displayed.
Mm. I want you to touch on something else, and I wasn't planning to ask you about this, but you did mention something because we're hearing a lot of this rhetoric that comes through the media. That's where we get it all. And you said, listen, the media is not accurately portraying things in this life, and we've seen it firsthand. You mentioned your kids being at the January 6th, Capitol whole thing when the riots broke out, and what they saw in real time in person versus how it was characterized in the news was completely accurate. And it was a great lesson for them to understand. It took me longer. I had to work in the news business for 20 some odd years. And to see this progressive lurch to the left, and by doing that, needing to cover up some of the things that was actually happening, and then to mischaracterize the other side, as you said earlier, to reach a certain goal, whatever that goal might be, like the ends justifies the means. I know, and I've talked to the sister-in-law of Scott Peterson in the past. I've spoken to you and to your wife about that case and what you experienced in that case. And this isn't about whether or not Scott Peterson is guilty or innocent. It's not that. It's what you saw the news media do day in and day out, while you were there in the courtroom observing the testimony and the facts that were being presented. And I was even though I was at the time in the news media, I was very taken aback by what you witnessed, and it was very telling to me because I did see those things also, being in it and seeing these reporters who wouldn't do their homework, and they would. Can you describe your and your wife's experience with the news media specifically as you were walking through and observing the Scott Peterson trial way back in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I'm from San Diego, and I was called in to be a counselor for the family, the Peterson family. I got to spend time with Scott. I'm still very close with Scott. Spent over 800 hours with him in a cage, and while he was on death row, now he's life in prison in California. And I still visit him frequently, video call and talk with him. Of course, Janie is an incredible sister-in-law to him and is leading the Scott Peterson appeal, the SPA team. And some good documentaries have come out on E! As well as Peacock and stuff that show that there was a burglary across the street and all this. But none of that was focused on during the trial. That was my coming of age, my early 20s, where I really thought cops were good, politicians were good. And then Jill and I, my wife and I, we would sit. I mean, 6 months we were in court during this whole thing. And we would sit and listen to evidence. And we were like, wow, this is amazing stuff. And then we'd watch the news at the hotel after the court day. And it was complete opposite, complete lies. Now, my wife, she's in a wheelchair, so she sits in the back. And she would look at some of these news anchors that were, supposed to be taking notes. And they were actually looking for gay hookups for a lunch, hookup. And there was just such a toxicity. There was perversion. There was low moral code in the world of media. I mean, they don't mind lying.
Hmm.
So perverse, and it is so twisted. I was changed forever. And I wanted my children to understand what you see on TV, on media, does not represent reality.
That was a tremendous lesson, and I can attest that that is in fact the case. And I think most Americans are waking up. I hope most Americans are waking up that when you see, the Lester Holtz or the Nancy Cordeses with CBS News or whoever it might be, the George Stephanopoulos news anchor on ABC News or David Muir, that what they're now saying about the issues that we're supposed to be informed about are not accurate and they're heavily mischaracterized and they're
But
slanted
here's the worst
to the
part, Tom. Sorry
progressive
for
left.
interrupting.
Go ahead.
But what it does actually is it brings toxicity into the general public. So the
Yes.
amount of hatred, the venomous, vulgar, vicious, and viral hatred poured out on the Petersons, who believe and stand by Scott that he's innocent. And thankfully, the LA Innocence Project has taken his case and they're testing DNA and things. They're really working hard on overturning this thing. I mean, I believe he's innocent, and I've been with the guy. I've spent more time with him than probably anyone else has, with Scott, other than his own family. And this is not the general population views Scott Peterson as a complete evil monster. Who the guy is. I'm a rational person. I've been with him. I've got a BS detector that's very sensitive. I know what evil is. I've been face to face with evil before. This is a good man. And that's what breaks my heart is actually the media is so powerful. It does persuade and ultimately create that mass pathology of rigid demands and total cognitive distortions and inability to see reality as it is. I'm really like it's you never want to be in the court of law,
Mm,
especially if it's on the signal of the media. The
mm.
truth in that case is who can promote the best argument that is not in touch with the reality. It's scary.
It is incredibly scary because these are the institutions we're told to trust. The courtrooms, judges, justices, and the news media. And you're right; it's what comes out of there. It's very toxic. So I guess this will be my final question to you. We see all this toxicity coming out. It has seeped into our society. I think it's permeated through every institution. It's in our colleges and our universities and our corporate lives as well. People believe this stuff and they don't understand they're being fully deceived, and it is affecting our mental health, and we're trying to find other solutions to that. But what would be just one overall arching general recommendation that you would give to whether they're adults like us, kids, teenagers, any demographic in this country? What would you say to help start the reversal of this trajectory off the cliff, to help us return to some sanity, but also to a sense of health when it comes to our mental health and our emotional health?
Well, I think you have to just dig down to ultimately the source of truth. So at first, you want to say, whatever I'm hearing, let me do my own fact checking. Let me just see, is that really what they said? Did JD Vance really say, something else in context? I didn't mean that at all.
Hmm.
And then you have to ask, well, what are the two parties promoting? Are they promoting the basic first principles of the US Constitution? Let me educate myself to know what the Constitution is, what it promises me, what liberty is and how fragile it is, and what the past dictatorships, especially through communism, I mean, how it actually takes away the liberties of the people. So I go a little deeper. And finally, what was the Constitution built on? Judeo-Christian values. Let me study the Bible. Let me study the Levitical law. Let me see the wisdom behind it. So you have to study yourself, study to show yourself approved, not ashamed of the truth, but rightly dividing the truth. And we are lazy in this culture. But I challenge, double dog dare everybody. Please become a student, learn what is truth. And that
Yes.
truth will actually set you free. Free from what? From mass psychosis.
Mm. Yes, that is so good. That's a great way to put it. I can't thank you enough. And I know you came in on late notice. You're very busy. We will continue to have you back on this program because you're incredibly insightful. You speak truth, and it's based on years of study and evidence based facts checking and all that the process you go through to come to some semblance of truth and sharing it with us. Dr. Brooks Gibbs, appreciate your time. You go to what? Brooksgibbs.com, correct?
Yeah. I work at schools. I teach kids how to be rational, how to manage their emotions, solve their social problems. I'm teaching them old school golden rule and psychologically sound principles that they're not learning to victim proof kids so that they stop being so offended. That's my little part in the battle of
Yeah.
bringing back our country. Thank you.
Incredibly important part, and basically resilience and all these things that you teach are is what our kids and adults, frankly, nowadays need to learn. Brooks Gibbs, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, take care. All right, we want to now. I talked about election integrity prior to this. I want to go now to Senator Jim Runstad. Senator Jim Runstad is a state senator in the state of Michigan, in Michigan's 23rd district. Joining us now, Senator. Nice to have you on the program. Thank you for your time. Do we have the senator? Okay, we may not have him. If we do get him in a moment, great. And if not, we're going to have him back on the program. I know that the senator's down at the U.S. Mexico border in McAllen, Texas, where they're being briefed by, I believe, the Border Patrol about what's really happening down there. Because we have heard in the debate, even as recently, when David Muir, the news anchor at ABC News, actually made the claim that, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they have solved the issue. They finally cracked down. They instituted some very tough policies to stem the flow of illegal immigrants across this country. His only complaint was that it took him so long to do it. Why was that? The fact of the matter is, it hasn't stopped, and there are some real issues that it keeps coming across the border, and it's affecting these states that were, formerly free of these issues. When I first moved to Michigan, for example, that was about 11 and a half years ago. Was it 11 and a half years ago or so that I came here, and illegal immigration wasn't even on the radar in states within the Midwest. This was like specifically a major issue, but a major issue along the border states like in Texas, like in California, and even New Mexico and Arizona. But it's now a problem across the entire country to now where you're having major issues in Illinois and Michigan and Minnesota, Wisconsin, Colorado. You just name the state, it's there now. Even in, I think, Martha's Vineyard, they're having issues as well. So if we don't have the senator, we're going to have him back on the program. Do we have the senator? There he is. Oh, good. We have him. Senator Jim Runstad, thank you for your time. Can you hear me okay? Senator Runstad, can you hear me? All right. I tell you what we're going to do. Senator? Okay, we're going to have this conversation in a bit, and we're going to broadcast the conversation on another edition here of Tom Jordan Live, because we want to talk about what's happening across the country in states like Michigan, but it's a countrywide effort to make it easier for those who maybe shouldn't be voting in our elections able to vote. And Michigan, in one sense, is leading the way by what was a constitutional amendment, which was known as Proposal 2. That was voted in the midterms, and it was allowed to be voted in because of the mischaracterization that actually secured the election. It didn't do any of that. It made it actually much more easier to commit fraud if one wanted to. No longer a requirement for voter IDs, no more signature verification either. So that conversation with Senator Jim Runstad will be coming up. And I know he's at the border, so he's had some technical issues as well. So we appreciate his effort trying to connect with us. Listen, if you want to, you can also follow us, YouTube, Tom Jordan Live, Facebook, Tom Jordan Live, X, LinkedIn. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you find your podcast, you can locate this show. And we, of course, love you if you can go on to Patreon if you want to support this broadcast as well. The show, Tom Jordan Live, on Patreon. We love that as well. Until next time, we appreciate you joining us. God bless you. Have a fantastic day.